Hello, welcome to the Analyst Inside Cricket. Season's greetings to you all from me, Simon Hughes.
And from me, Simon Mann.
It's been a lively old week in the cricket stroke sporting world. South Africa have qualified for the World Test Championship final by beating Pakistan. Australia winning that amazing test match in Melbourne to go 2-1 up in the Border Gavaskar series. And Bristol City have won two games in a row, Simon.
And I was there to witness both of them. I'm not sure what's more remarkable out of those three things, really. Probably not surprising that Australia beat India. South Africa in the World Test Championship final. Well, it's looked a bit more likely, hasn't it, in the last few months. So they're there. Bristol City winning 2 games in a row. Well, they haven't done it for about, 10 months, 9 months or something. No, about 9 months. Behave yourself. And no goals conceded as well.
Wow, amazing. Well, I'm happy for you anyway.
That's very kind of you.
Fantastic. The India-Australia series has been compelling viewing. I'm not quite sure about the suggestion that it's the Melbourne Test was the greatest of all time, though, are you?
No, absolute nonsense. I think it was I don't know how serious it was, a tweet from Trent Copeland, who's a former first-class cricketer in Australia, now commentator, saying the Melbourne Test was, if not the greatest, one of the greatest, or it was one of the greatest, if not the greatest test matches ever played. Well, I mean, that to me, that's just hyperbole. Actually, before we came on air, we reeled off about 10 test matches just from memory, and that's not going through all the sides, just the ones that we remember that seemed, from a distance anyway, better than that one. I mean, it was a really riveting game, wasn't it? I think the crowd made a massive difference as well. I mean, astonishing crowd turned up, 373,691, beating the record in Australia set back in 1937. Some better test matches than this one. Okay, yeah. It might be a bit Anglo-centric, this list. Edgbaston 2005, England's narrow victory in the Ashes. Headingley 2019, Stokes' miracle. What about Headingley 1981? Melbourne 1974 even. A Melbourne Test match in 1974, which is part of our current series, Yoz, called Headhunters. We look back at that game in the Ashes where Australia were 8 runs short with 2 wickets left and all the scores were around about the 240 mark. Melbourne 1982, when England pinched a victory right at the end when Australia lost by a handful of runs when Jeff Thompson was caught at slip. Kolkata 2001, that match in which India didn't lose a wicket in the day and they won after following on. Sri Lanka's victory at Headingley in 2014. Incredible innings from Angelo Matthews. Jimmy Anderson out to the penultimate ball of the match. Shall we go on? Yes, we can. St John's 2003, West Indies, 418 for 7, the world record on the chase against Australia. Barbados, 1999, Brian Lara making 153 not out, as West Indies scored 311 for 9. The Centenary Test, again at Melbourne, 1977, Australia winning by 45 runs, the same result as the first Test match that was played 100 years before. Derek Randall's 170, not quite enough for England. The tied Test match between Australia and India in Chennai, 347 Australia scored in their second innings. Is that enough? Is that enough for you?
The argument.
Those are just the ones that we can remember.
No,
just remember off the top of our heads.
No, sure. And by the way, if you want to listen to that series we've done on the 74-75 Ashes, all the episodes are on our sister site, the Analyst Plus, which you can find by going to patreon.com/the Analyst 25, and we are putting all our podcasts on that site as well, ad-free. So please go and have a look at that site, patreon.com/the Analyst 25, where we've got a lot of our extra content at the moment. It's a really interesting site. Have a look at it. You can join a WhatsApp group and join the conversation, the daily cricket conversation as well. So well worth doing. Okay, so you've given us a whole incredible list of test matches. We should focus on the one that we saw that just finished today in Melbourne, Australia, India. And we'll talk a bit later, by the way, about our highlights and lowlights of the year overall. This was certainly a highlight in terms of a match, wasn't it? I mean, a brilliant game started, absolutely fire-started by the debutant, the 19-year-old Sam Konstas, who was piloted in almost at the 11th hour to play his first test match. 19-year-old, had only played 11 first-class games. And wow, didn't he kickstart Australia's innings?
Oh, extraordinary. I mean, it was extraordinary, wasn't it? 11th ball, he tried to ramp Jasprit Bumrah, and he kept on trying to ramp him, and then he succeeded. I just thought this is the sort of cricket that we have not seen before. Okay, we've seen England try to do this type of thing, but not a 19-year-old making his debut in front of 80,000+ people at the MCG against one of the greatest bowlers that's ever lived. I mean, it was phenomenal stuff while it lasted. Riveting, and just something so different and such a talking point. How good is he, Oz? How good is Sam Konstas? Is it too early to say?
I think it is too early to say. I mean, certainly he's not short of confidence. I mean, that's an understatement. I mean, I think that the shots he played were quite well thought out, because he played and missed at the first over 4 out of the first 6 balls from Bumrah outside off stump, just shaving away. And I think he figured out, and he was given the backing by the management to say, go and play your way, go and take those on, put the pressure back on the bowlers in whatever way you think is appropriate. And he did exactly that. And he worked out that, these balls are missing the off stump by, a few inches. So actually the ramp shot is a risk. Well, it's not a risk-free.
Well, it's not, is it? It's not risk-free.
It's a calculated risk, clearly. And it could go horribly wrong, as Ollie Pope found out in that rearguard action in that third Test match in Hamilton.
And as Joe Root's found out as well, Yoz.
No, of course. I mean, it is a risky shot because it's premeditated and you're showing the bowlers your stumps most of the time. So, it's a very risky shot. But it came off, and I think it was the source of Australia's momentum in that first innings. I mean, okay, he made 60, but he took 34 off Bumrah's opening spell, and Bumrah was certainly put on the back foot and taken out of the attack, and that really allowed the Australian middle order then to prosper, and they put up the best score of their series so far, 474 in the first innings, and really that set them up for the game. So although there were times when, as the number 3 or the person next in would have been heart in their mouth watching Konstas bat, it was a clever innings, and it wasn't just ramp shots. He came down the wicket, hit the ball over the top, picked up Bumrah's slower ball, hit it over deep long on for 6, pulled Siraj from down the wicket, flat over deep mid wicket. I mean, there was some fantastic talent there. Now, I messaged Shane Watson, the former Australian all-rounder, who has been mentoring Sam Konstas for the last 4 years, comes from the same town. And he says here, I mean, I was interested in the sort of impact that Watson may have had on him. Firstly, he's got this split grip, which means that his bottom hand is quite near the splice, and it means he can manipulate the bat more easily for those ramp shots, a bit like, I described this in the Sunday Times as a bit like a chef tossing a pancake. That's the way he plays the shot, sort of flipping the ball over his head. And the split grip he's got enables that shot to be played a bit more easily. But Shane Watson says here on the message, Sam has always been fascinated by batting technique and has always looked to tinker enough to find his sweet spot. I've been working with him for the last 4 years, and most of the things I've worked with him on is the mental side of his game, which is all of the information is in my book. And I have actually read Shane Watson's book, Winning the Inner Battle. It's here, and it's out now, and he's also created a website as well, all about bringing the best version of you to cricket. And if it does sound a bit like sort of psychological psychobabble, it's actually quite interestingly written, because he writes a lot of case studies, scenarios that he was in as a test player and why he failed in various situations, and most of them were to do with the mindset he had adopted at that particular time. And he says that since he met a sports psychologist late in his career, he really thrived. In his last 4 or 5 years as a professional player and international player, he did really well. And so he's passing all that on to the next generation, of which Sam Konstas is one. And it's actually worth reading some of Watson's stuff if you're interested in that area. You can go to shanewatson.au, and he's created a whole website on mind games in cricket. So, although some people will sort of laugh at what Shane Watson's image might be in their mind, usually referring an LBW appeal against Jimmy Anderson and referring it and not winning the umpire's verdict. I mean, he was a very thoughtful cricketer, and I think he's having a big influence.
If only you'd had that book, Jos,
Yeah,
before you
I
went
know.
out to bat
Oh,
as a night
absolutely. Or
watchman
bowl.
at Lords when Mickey Stewart was there to watch you,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
you were close to getting the England team, and you hit your first ball to square leg.
Yeah. No, exactly. I mean, I know it sounds so silly, but so much of this game is played in the head. And watch Sam Konstas bat. Actually, I listened to his pre-match interviews before the game, and the confidence that he was just giving off, exuding. He did an interview in mid innings, didn't he, to the commentators when they dropped the spider cam down at drinks, and he gave a forthright interview there, saying they said to him, "Are you going to do that to Bumrah when he comes back in on again?" And he went, "Well, yeah, I probably will. I've got to put the pressure on him. So yeah, if it's working, I'm going to carry on." And so admirable confidence. Of course, I write the piece in the Sunday Times praising him and saying a great idea and Bazball and all that. He gets out for 8 in the second innings and Australia potter along at 2 and over. So, it's a journalist's curse, isn't it?
Yeah, well, but he got tongues wagging, didn't he? And he's a watch this space cricketer. What's he going to come up with next? How is he going to bat in the future? It was a lovely ball from Bumrah to get him in the second innings, and Bumrah looked as if he was hauling India back into the Test match. So Australia. There's lots of things to talk about, and we'll talk about them in the next few minutes. Just quickly, Steve Smith, should England be worried? So 200s, back-to-back hundreds in the series. So it's kind of like all or nothing from Smith. A couple of hundreds, apart from that 13-4, 2-0, 17. But, 200s against this Indian attack, against Jasprit Bumrah as well.
He's a great player. He's an unorthodox player, but you can never discount him. I mean, what those figures say is that he's a bad starter. And we sort of know that, and you've got to get him early, because if you don't, he's going to get a lot of runs, and that's almost sort of straightforward, basic knowledge, isn't it? There's a logic. I think that he's become more vulnerable to the LBW because he's missing some of those that he used to hit unerringly, picking the ball off the stumps, middle and off, flicking them away through the leg side, and bowlers go, "Oh, how did he hit that?" And I think he's missing a few more now and getting LBW. His eyes are in the mid-30s now, and sometimes your reactions aren't quite as quick. But he's still a fantastic player, and he's got this insatiable desire. So of course England should be worried.
Now India, Rohit Sharma missed the first Test match, comes back into the side. Has barely scored a run. 3 Test matches, 31 runs at 6.20. It's Mike Dinesh territory, isn't it? Mike Dinesh, the England captain, 1974-5 series that we've been investigating in our Headhunters series. He dropped himself for the Sydney Test match. Well, the Sydney Test match is next up for India. They have to win to keep themselves in with a chance of making the World Test Championship final and of levelling the series as well. Virat Kohli's not had a great series either. He keeps nicking off behind or to slip. 167 runs at 27.83, and those figures include 100 in one of the innings, a game in which India were dominating the first Test match. He's really struggling as well. 2 top class players for India. Really struggling. Are they at the end?
Yeah, I think they are. I think Rohit Sharma definitely is. He's had a long career now, hasn't he? I think what they're both feeling, and I mean, we said this even when New Zealand beat India in India a while ago, that neither Rohit Sharma or Virat Kohli ever plays any first-class cricket. I think Kohli's last first-class game was about 2012 or something, and Sharma's was about 2016. So they haven't either of them played any first-class cricket for around a decade, and I think you just lose your natural batting rhythm and tempo, and technical flaws sort of start to creep in a little bit. Of course, they played a lot of one-day cricket in that time and Test cricket, and had their success, of course. But over time, just chips away at you, and even those great players. I mean, Kohli, obviously one of the Fab Four 2 or 3 years ago. Bowlers around the world have been gunning for him, and he hasn't produced, has he? And that eats away at your confidence, your desire. I don't know whether this is related, but he's had a couple of kids. He's moving to London. He's going to be living the rest of his life in England, I gather. Those sort of things, chip away at your.
So he's moving
desire,
on,
doesn't it?
he's moving on in his own head. Is that what you're saying?
I
And well,
suppose, yeah.
not just in his head, but also physically as well. He's thinking about the future now.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that it does just take that edge away slightly. And you could even feel, when he had that clash with Sam Konstas on the field when Konstas was playing so well, and he kind of shoulder kind of barged him a bit, didn't he? I mean, that was a bit sort of petty, really. But I mean, that was the actions of a man who knows that his days are numbered slightly, I think.
Yeah, it wasn't a good look, was it? That really. I mean, that physical contact on the field, fair enough in football and rugby and that, but not in cricket, really. Well, not really, definitely not. Not a good look at all. Now, there's a couple of other things to pick out from that Test match. Jasprit Bumrah again, fantastic. 30 wickets at 12 in the series. 30 wickets at 12. And he's gone over 200 now, and he's taken those 200 wickets at under 20, which is extraordinary. I mean, the best fast bowler that I've seen before Bumrah, Malcolm Marshall, 376 wickets at 20.94, 81 Test matches. I mean, there's other great fast bowlers as well. We could do a whole podcast series on who's the greatest fast bowler of all time, couldn't we? I mean, there are plenty in the frame, but for me, Marshall was just a fantastic bowler, and Bumrah's figures at the moment are better than him. I mean, he's I say keeping India in the series. I mean, he's kind of keeping them afloat on his own, isn't he? Really, with all those wickets. If it wasn't for him, they'd be submerged, really.
Yeah, and he's taken the big wickets consistently as well. It got Travis Head in the last Test for Norton 1. He's got Smith out 3 times. He's got Khawaja out a number of times. He's got the top order, hasn't he? I mean, he's so good with the new ball. I mean, he's got that sort of Jimmy Anderson finger trip control, and yet, pace and consistency as well, and the odd deception, the slower balls, and he's just brilliant bowler. I think he's on a par with Marshall. Marshall was quicker. Marshall could bowl literally express 90 miles an hour. Bumrah he just nudges the 90 mile an hour sort of speed occasionally, but he's not consistently that quick. But his deception is amazing, and actually the TV coverage has done some interesting stuff of his biomechanics, just showing how unusual his release position and his general the way he whips the ball down is very unorthodox and difficult to pick up. So your trigger movements as a batsman are affected. He's just a very difficult bowler to pick up and actually line up, and everyone's had difficulty with him. And those figures, 203 Test wickets at 19.4, are just totally remarkable. No bowler who's got 150 plus wickets has got anything close to that average, apart from SF Barnes, who we talked about before, from 1912, and nobody over 200 wickets has taken their wickets at that low cost. So he's got to be up there with sort of, one of the greatest 5 bowlers of all time, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to say definitively who's the greatest bowler of all time, and but there are a few who are just above the rest, aren't they? And he, at the moment, see how his career develops, but he's been fabulous, and there are a few other fabulous pace bowlers as well.
I think he's beaten the edge something like 68 times in the series, and yet he's still smiling as well, isn't he? He's a very benign, kind
very
of
affable,
friendly, lovely, chatty sort of character, very modest. Like many fast bowlers, like the Glenn McGraths of the past as well. Gentle giant off the field, and just an absolutely remorseless competitor on it.
And of course, let's remind everyone, he was the one that led India to their victory in the first Test match. And Rohit's come back, and they've struggled since then. You said 3-1 Australia at the start of the series. I mean, that's looking a pretty good tip. I went 3-2, wasn't sure which team was going to win. I couldn't see a draw, but of course the rain.
Usual fence sitter, Simon Mann.
The rain ruined the Brisbane Test match, but I mean, it could be 4-1 if it hadn't ruined the Brisbane Test match. Anyway, the series is still alive, going to Sydney. You mentioned the TV company there, so that kind of segue into technology, Oz, and a lot of people in India very unhappy with Jaiswal's dismissal today. For those of you who haven't seen, just a very quick reprise, short ball from Cummins. Jaiswal went for the pull. He was given not out on the field by Joel Wilson. Australia reviewed it. They were sure there must have been something there. And then when they looked at the technology, well, it looked as if it gloved him, but there was nothing on Snicker, or whatever device you want to call it, that thing that records whether there's a scratch on the glove or on the bat or anything like that. So Shafadullah, the TV umpire, he said, well, look, there's no scratch on Snicko, but I can see clearly, I think I can see clearly, the ball has flicked the glove. So he gave him out, he dispatched him. Simon Toffel actually said that, look, if you can see from the pictures that you think that the ball has struck the glove or the bat or whatever, and there's nothing on the technology, then it's within your rights as a third umpire, a TV umpire, to give a player out or to make a decision based on that. And so that overruled the technology. And it seems, I mean, look, Rohit Sharma in his press conference at the end of the match said, look, he probably did hit it, and therefore you can scrub out probably, which means, yeah, he did hit it, because he's probably had a chat with Jasprit. So yeah, I got something on that. But Jasprit stood out there and he was chatting with the umpires, because he was probably making the point, well, look, okay, I think I hit it, but there's nothing on the technology to say I did.
But that's not quite right, is it? Because the cameras are part of the technology.
Exactly. I think that's the point Simon Toffel was making. And
the evidence on the cameras was pretty good. Funnily enough, when they slow it down, it's not as clear as when they play it in full speed, when it's close up, and it's those cameras are now filming at sort of 75 frames a second or more. You can really pick up the slight deviation of the ball. I mean, what sometimes happens with this technology, as in the sound part of it anyway, is that the microphones are in the stumps, right down at the bottom. And when the batsman is playing a pull shot, actually his hands, in this case, went behind his body and were sort of out of the detection range of the sound of the microphone. So I'm not surprised they didn't really pick it up. It was a slightly muffled looking, sort of not much of a spike, a little lump in the sound waves. And I think that was partly because the ball glanced off the edge and the glove, and partly because his hands and bat were sort of behind himself. So they were blocking the listening ability of that microphone. But luckily, they saw common sense. They said, well, look, I can see the deviation. When the ball glances off the bat and glove, you can see the ball change direction, give him out. And I thought that was a really good piece of umpiring. It took them a long time. I thought it was completely fair. And, sometimes those sound waves don't prove the whole story because of different reasons, like other sounds affecting, corrupting the graph, or the guy being out of range or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it looked out, didn't it? I mean, I have to say, I had to see it quite a few times to convince myself that it definitely was out, because you are kind of conditioned to go with the technology, aren't you? If there's no scratch, you think, well, hold on a second, is that kind of like, because sometimes the ball seems to swing away, doesn't it, after it's gone past the bat? We've seen that, and so it did seem to change course, but I don't know, it wobbles in the air a bit. I thought that possibly could be it. But
to be honest,
it was
what
very
sometimes happens with those sound waves is because the sound isn't very distinct for, say, a muffled glance off the glove or something like that, the graph doesn't move very much. And sometimes in the past, I'm not saying they do it now, but sometimes in the past, I've sat next to technicians who slightly exaggerate the spike. They sort of manipulate it to make it look a bit bigger. They know there's something there, but it's not very clear to the TV viewer or to the third umpire, so they just exaggerate it slightly to make the story clearer. They didn't do that on this occasion, but maybe they would have. If they would have, it would have made the evidence better.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting one. The game of cricket throws up something new the whole time, doesn't it? It seems, anyway. And then there was one afterwards where Akashdeep was caught at short leg. Australia appealed, and there did look to be, well, there was something on the technology, but after the ball had gone past the bat, which is looks a bit confusing, doesn't it? But then when they did the camera from the side, I've never seen this happen before. Their pictures are so precise, aren't they? You could actually see the ball just feathering against the bat. It left the tiniest of red marks on his bat. And he was on his way as well. And that I don't know whether that just added a bit more fuel to the fire of the Indian supporters who were looking at a decision, weren't they, earlier in the series when KL Rahul was given out caught behind, and they thought, well, is that hit the bat or is it just his bat hitting the pad? So they feel that they've been a bit hard done by. I think the problem is what happens is when you're the struggling team in a series, as India are now, those big decisions when they go against you, they are magnified, if you like, because they are more important, because they kind of settle the game. You're being dominated, so you need those to go your way. You hope they go your way just to stay in touch, really. That's why they seem more important, because you're kind of fighting against the flow of the game.
No, I think that's a really good point. And actually, really, India can't have any complaints because they made a lot of mistakes in the game. They dropped quite a few catches. I mean, poor old Jaiswal, who had a brilliant game with the bat, but dropped at least 3 catches in the game. There was a stupid run out of Jaiswal in the first innings that was Kohli's fault because he was ball watching, and other things that they did. The top order flopped a couple of times, things like that. So they really haven't got themselves to blame. They have got themselves to blame, India, whereas Australia caught everything, didn't they? I mean, they're catching today on the final day. They snapped up some really difficult chances. What about Pant getting out after tea when they were only 3 down, and he gets a long hop from Travis Head of all people and lobs it down long on. Good catch by Mitchell Marsh, but stupid shot.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, I thought his shot in the first innings was he was a bit more culpable in the first innings. I think it's a tricky one because the ball from Head, it just looked like a juicy long hop, didn't it? And it probably wasn't quite as, might sound a strange thing to say, it wasn't quite as bad a ball as he thought it was. So he couldn't quite manoeuvre himself to hit it with as much power as he wanted. It's still a big hit out towards deep mid-wicket.
I liked Travis Head's explanation of why he was bowling, by the way. Someone said, is that part of the master plan? They said, well, actually, no. Our over rate was a bit down. So captain said, I'll have a few after tea just to get our over rate up again.
Amazing, isn't it? Yeah, and that got them back in got them on the winning path, and then it was all very quick, wasn't it? 7 wickets after tea. I mean, I think that sort of added to the drama, didn't it? It was a fluctuating game. And look, it was an excellent game of cricket. It was really intriguing. We haven't mentioned Nitish Kumar Reddy's 100. Brilliant moment for him and his family, and all. A wonderful fight back from India after seemingly being out of the game. And then Bumrah seemingly dragging them back in again by taking those wickets. But it was always going to be. You felt it was always going to be tricky for India on that final day. Looking at 350 around that sort of score on the final day with all those overs left, and Australia had 2 new balls as well. You felt it was going to be tough, but it looked as if a draw was on the cards. But it only takes a few balls to change a game with the ball, doesn't it? With the bat, it takes a heck of a lot of balls to change the game with the bat. But with the ball, 3 balls can turn a game, and that's what it did. And Australia caught well. So
rightly, Pat Cummins, man of the match for 3 wickets in each innings, and getting the tactics right after tea, and
some runs
some 2 key runs. 40 odd runs, 90 runs in the match, and helping Australia swell both their first and second innings to giving them a substantial lead. So a tremendous all-round performance, really, by Australia, who feel now have the momentum going into that final Test match in Sydney that starts on the 3rd of January.
Here's a question for you, Yoz, before we take a break and then consider the World Test Championship. I'm going to look at our highs and lows of the year. If you could take, if you're England and you're allowed to take one player out of Australia's team for next year's Ashes, so you say that person is not going to play in the whole series, who would you take out?
You mean to give England an advantage?
Yeah, to give England a chance. Yeah, if they could sort of play a joker and say, right, our joker is X doesn't play in the series. I'll tell you what, have a think about that.
Well, I'll tell you what the answer is Cummins.
Okay.
Pat Cummins is my answer. What about yours?
Well, I'm thinking Cummins. I'm also thinking Travis Head. Yeah, what are those two, I think? Cummins or Head, I think, would be the joker card England would play. Okay, Yoz, we've had some really exciting cricket over the last few days. Tremendous victory for South Africa against Pakistan. It looks as though they were going to lose. They were 8 down, still needing about 50 to win. Mohammad Abbas was bowling over after over for Pakistan, but they managed to dig themselves out of trouble with the bat. Kagiso Rabada, vital runs at the end. So South Africa going to Lords. But Should they be going to Lords? I mean, this is been a bit of a debate around cricket circles. They've only played 11 matches in the World Test Championship cycle. England have played 22. Other teams have played more. Who have South Africa played against? Well, let's have a very quick look at that to tell you who they played against in the World Test Championship. They won 1-0 in the West Indies. They won 2-0 in Bangladesh. They beat Sri Lanka 2-0 at home. They drew 1-1 at home against India. They lost 2-0 in New Zealand with that sort of C team that they sent out there because their domestic T20 tournament took precedence, I should say. And they beat Pakistan 1-0, or they're 1-0 up against Pakistan with one to play. So the accusation is that they've had a favourable draw and they don't play that much. Well, that's kind of not their fault. It's kind of the economics of Test cricket around the world. But is it right that South Africa are in the final?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I suppose it's not, because they haven't played everybody, have they? They haven't played England in this cycle, and they haven't played Australia in this cycle. They played India, as you say, in those 2 Test matches and managed to win one of them. But I think it does rather skew the table because they've only played 11, and they have played quite a few of those lesser teams, if you like. So it's difficult. I mean, I think it's good for the game, personally, that South Africa are in the final, because it will get lots of promotion in South Africa and Africa generally. So, it's good for the game to have different teams in that World Test Championship final. I sort of hear Stokes and others' arguments saying, well, it's much harder, say, for England to get into the final because they play the other teams more often, the better teams more often in longer series and play more Test matches, so they're probably more tired, more chance of them losing points in the over rate penalties.
Well, hold on, you can control that yourself. You can control that yourself. I'm not having that. Really,
no, I'm being facetious. But I do understand Australia, England, and India's gripes about, if they are making any, about South Africa getting into it. But these are the rules at the moment, and South Africa have exploited them, and they're rightfully in the final, which will be good for the game. They aren't necessarily the best Test team in the world, but in the context of this competition, they have the chance of winning that trophy.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it. Look, the World Test Championship, the way it's set up, is not ideal. We all know that. In an ideal world, you'd have everyone playing everybody else over in 2-3 match series, something like that. That's the perfect world. We don't live in the perfect world in Test cricket because of the economies of scale, whatever, for the various countries involved. So it's not economical for South Africa to play 5-match series, particularly against all these teams, or 3-match series against some of the teams. And it's hard to organise all these games with all the other competing interests as well. The World Test Championship is a compromise. It is a compromise, but I think it's a worthwhile compromise. It's got us talking, hasn't it? It's got us really interested over the last few months about who's going to make it. There are 4 or 5 teams still involved. 1 or 2 have dropped by the wayside. Now we're down to 4 teams who can make the final. One's already there. It's between India, Australia, and Sri Lanka to make the final, and that's interesting. That's good for the game, I think. So, okay, look, we just have to accept it's imperfect. Life's imperfect, isn't it? Sometimes, life is not fair. So
who do we reckon is going to join South Africa then? What are the different permutations, do you reckon?
Well, if Australia win at the SCG, they're in the final. That's the end of it, okay? India need to win at the SCG and hope that Australia fail to win in Sri Lanka. They can only afford Australia to draw one and lose one. So yeah, it's tough for India. Sri Lanka have an outside chance, but they need Australia not to win in Sydney, and then they need to beat Australia in that series 2-0 at home. So it's probably looking quite good for Australia to make the final. They would be big favourites to make the final. So Australia, South Africa at Lords in June. That's looking the most likely scenario. But it's still alive with a handful of matches left in the World Test Championship. Look, it's not ideal. It's not. But it's probably better than nothing, better what we had before, and it also creates some focus and it creates some interest, and it also, just from a sort of parochial point of view, it says to England, come on, you need to be competing for a place in the World Test Championship final. You've got the players, you should be in the mix at this stage, and they're not, and I think that's to their their detriment. They've got the ability, they've got the quality, they've got the players, and I think they should have the ambition as well to try to make it.
Also, the first 10 Test matches they play in the next cycle are against India and Australia. So by the time we get to this time next year, England would have played, I think, 9 tests, 5 against India, 4 against Australia, and 1 against Zimbabwe. So 10 tests they'll have played since May. So almost the same number of tests as South Africa have played in their whole cycle, 11. England will have played 10, 9 against the 2 best teams in the world, potentially. It does show how skewed the table is. But I think, as you say, I think it's good for the game. It's something that the marketeers can get stuck into. And great, if South Africa can possibly win their first ever ICC tournament as well, because, of course, they've never won the World Cup before. So, I mean, it would be brilliant, fillip for them and for cricket, the global game.
Yeah, definitely. Look, yeah, it's a compromise, but it's better than nothing. And it's tougher for England. I accept that, but the economies work for them, don't they? The fact that England play more Test cricket, it works them financially, and also for India and Australia as well. So yeah, that's where we are really. The way the revenue's distributed in the ICC, it's tough for South Africa to play more Test cricket. Perhaps there's not necessarily that will to do it, but it's great that they've got to the final. Okay, Yoz, so we finish off with our highs and lows of the year. What do you want to start with, lows or highs?
Well, I think let's start with the lows, actually, because I mean we can finish on a high, can't we? I mean, the devastating loss of Graham Thorpe in midsummer, extraordinarily sad tale of someone who was a wonderful player for England and a tremendous asset to the game, who mentored so many players, coached so many young players, was one of Joe Root's original coaches and mentors, and didn't even live to see Joe eventually overtake Alistair Cook and become England's leading run scorer. I mean, just such a sad story, really, of someone who still had so much to offer and yet just couldn't carry on and took his own life. I mean, it was devastating. Actually, I remember in the summer we had our charity match at Teddington CC where Thorpe would have played a few times, and we just all stood in a minute's silence on a beautiful summer's day and just thought, what a terrible loss to the game and to his family and to Surrey and to England. Could we have done more? Could we have done more to help? And why are there so many players that do suffer this depression, this isolation from the game that has given them so much and that they have given so much to? It's a really upsetting part of cricket's history, really, that there've been so many players who've taken their own life for whatever reason. Graham Thorpe being probably one of the most famous.
Yeah, no, I would second that in terms of sort of low point of the year for the game. Definitely, yeah. It was shocking, wasn't it? And desperately sad. It's going to actually seem banal to go on really to sort of another low point just on the field really of the year. I think for me, just in terms of pure cricketing terms, that the low point of the year was England's performance against Sri Lanka at the Oval in that final Test match. It was utterly woeful performance and just seemed cavalier, and they seemed to toss away a Test match. And we've just been talking about the World Test Championship final, and that was a game that if they'd won, they could have stayed in serious contention for making the final. Obviously, they have to do well in Pakistan as well, and they would be sort of in the frame to make it. But that performance, that actually started the game pretty well. They had grip of the game and then frittered it away with, I think, one of their poorest performances of the year. So I think that, just pure cricketing terms, I think that would be my low point. But the terribly sad death of Graham Thorpe, I think, without doubt, was the low point of the year.
Yeah, there was a huge attendance actually in Southwark for his memorial service. Just shows how in such high regard he was held by so many in the game. And one of the things about Thorpe was actually for whatever the way he played the game was so unselfish, always, and that won the highest amount of respect from both opponents and colleagues. The way that the commitment he showed to the team, and that match, just to related to that match at the Oval against Sri Lanka, England were disrespectful to the opposition, I thought, on that particular occasion. They just thought the Sri Lankans, we've won this series 2-0, it doesn't really matter this last test match, it's only Sri Lanka, who cares really? And it was just a bit, it was a bit cocky, I thought, from England, and disrespectful to the opposition, to the game, and they got what they deserved.
What about your high point of the year then, yours? You said you're going to finish on a high. What was your sort of highlight of the year?
Well, I think the emergence of Gus Atkinson, on that first morning at Lords, which of course was Jimmy Anderson's final test match at Lords against West Indies. And it was an amazing occasion, wasn't it? Anderson leading the team onto the field, and lots of celebrations and cheering and everything. And he opened the bowling, of course, as he rightfully should have, and bowled well. Didn't get any wickets. And then Atkinson comes on almost sort of stage left. We'd forgotten that he was actually making his Test debut because there'd been so much fanfare about Anderson's last Test, and there came Atkinson and took 3 wickets in his first 5 or 6 overs. He bowled 2 maidens, I remember, early on, and then took a wicket or 2, and he was up and running. And he took 12 wickets in that match, didn't he? With just a very nice method, simple sort of bowling from the pavilion end at Lords, making the ball do a little bit either way, getting edges, getting LBWs. Bowling, and we sort of equated it a little bit to the way Glenn McGrath had bowled at Lords for many occasions. Just keep it using the slope, keeping a good pace going and a good consistent line and length, not making too much fanfare about when he took a wicket, just sort of getting on with his job in a very methodical way. It was a very understated emergence, and yet incredibly productive. 12 wickets in his first Test, which was quite remarkable. And, what we found out about him afterwards, of course, was that, he lost his mum only a couple of years before to a horrific car accident, and, has quietly kept his counsel on it ever since. And, actually the legal case was brewing at the time to try and find the culprit and put him behind bars. And that was all going on in the background to this Test debut, and how fantastically well he's done. It wasn't a flash in the pan, it wasn't one swallow makes a summer. It was a tremendous debut, which he's backed up with now 50 wickets since he started. So it's been a tremendous emergence. I suppose a handing over of the baton from Anderson to Atkinson. I'm not saying that Atkinson will go on to take 600 Test wickets, but it was a nice way for Anderson to finish, to see a younger bowler like that do so well.
And a Test 100 as well.
In the next Test
the next Lord's Test match. And that was, in a way, equally.
I think he enjoyed that more, didn't he?
Well, you bowlers do, isn't it? When you finally get some runs.
Of course. And what about your highlight?
Well, I mean, just from a sort of purely England point of view, in terms of the highlights of the year, I thought the win in Hyderabad in the first Test in India was extraordinary. One of England's sort of great overseas wins, with Ollie Pope making that 100. And then the other highlight, another kind of like I was there moment, actually, when you to witness it. And you know me, Yoz. I like to grind down the opposition. You don't let the opposition ever get back in the game. I still chunter on about England enforcing the follow-on in Wellington and allowing New Zealand to come back and beat them by 1 run on that one tour previous to the one that they won recently. So Root and Brooke putting on 454 in Multan in the first Test match, and an England team scoring 823 for 7. Now that's properly grinding the opposition down, isn't it? Although, having said that, they didn't really grind them down, did they? They just obliterated them. Anyway, that's the way to play cricket. Don't let the opposition back into the game. Score 800, put on 450. Thanks very much for coming.
If only they'd back that up with the rest of the series. I mean, who'd think they would have lost that series having produced that? It was remarkable. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a flatter pitch than that, ever. I mean, it was how you bowl on that pitch. I mean, it was just I don't think you could even get wickets with a grenade on that pitch. Never
Well, it
mind.
was so flat they used it again, Yoz. It was so flat they used it again.
Yeah,
Lasted,
that's right.
and by about the 12th day, it became tricky to bat on. But only by then, well, I say only by then, sort of, it was just indications 1 or 2 days before that. But I mean, Pakistan batted first on the first day of the second Test match on the same pitch, and they scored runs reasonably freely, and England responded pretty well as well. I think it must be close to being one of the flattest pitches ever. But we mustn't go for recency bias, otherwise we'll be into the same avenue that Trent Copeland's gone down, which is this is the greatest Test match of all time or whatever. I'm sure there've been some flat pitches in the past and some incredibly dull draws. It's just that teams score so much quicker these days and are a bit more imaginative about trying to get victories.
Yes, well, anyway, we'll leave you then with the memories of Multan as our final thought for the year so far. There's a couple of days to go in it. Hope you enjoy your New Year celebrations. Of course, we'll be back straight after the New Year to recap the final Test match of this compelling series between Australia and India. Australia currently 2-1 up. And just another reminder about our sister site, the Analyst Plus, which is at patreon.com/theanalyst25, where our content, for instance, on the 74-75 Ashes series at the moment is running. And actually, Derek Pringle and I are doing this Substack blog, and he's written about that amazing Melbourne Test match of 1982-3, which England won by 3 runs as well, with some lovely photos from his own photo album of England in the dressing room after winning that Test match. That's on Substack as well. You can find that if you go to the Crickverse, and that's our regular blog, which I hope, Simon, you're going to contribute to at some point. Anyway, we'll leave you with those thoughts and to say Happy New Year from me.
And Happy New Year from me. And just to say that our next episode of Headhunters will be out fairly shortly. We have recorded it, and it looks at the Test match in Sydney where Mike Denness dropped himself. How would England get on against Thompson and Lilly in that Test match? Well, you can find out if you listen to the next episode of Headhunters, which is coming soon. Happy New Year, everyone. Speak to you next year. Goodbye for now.